Welcome back to Learning to Code with Multi-Theft Auto. In this episode, we're going to take our client-side scripting further and build our first GUI. We're also going to take a look more at how to use the event system. So, in order to make our first GUI, what we need to do is understand a little bit more about how events work in Multi-Theft Auto. So up until this point, we've seen a lot of add event handler in our code. We've been using it to do things like on player join, or when a resource starts or stops. That you've seen as we just do add event handler on player join, and then we attach that to the root element. We give it a closure. And that's pretty much it. Now, the next couple things that we're going to need to know for client-side stuff is receive propagated is another argument, and priority. We won't mess too much with priority. Let's just leave that out for now. But receive propagated is something that we're typically going to want to set to false, because we only want when specifically this element receives something for us to actually interact with it. In Multi-Theft Auto, when you have events, when you trigger an event using something like these below that we'll dive further into in a minute, when you trigger the event, you trigger it for a specific element. So in this case, on player join gets triggered on a player element. So we have a player being, getting a player named, Cortez Boy. This player, if we triggered, and the script does behind the scenes, triggers on player join when they join, we would never actually get in here if we bound it to the root element and then turn this to false. However, this defaults to true, and so in our code on the server side, this actually works because we receive propagated, which means that when the event gets fired for the player, it moves up the tree towards the root element, and eventually will trigger on the root element so that we can receive this event here, and then source becomes the player. So the source is equal to the player that actually triggered the event for. So in what we're going to dive into today, we are going to add custom events. So instead of something like on player join, what we're going to be doing is something like login menu open, something like that. Now this event doesn't exist in Multi-Theft Auto itself. This is something that we're going to create as a custom event by doing something just called add event. Now, the second argument that add event takes is remotable. Remotable means, can this be fired? If it's a client-side event, can this be fired from the server? And if it's a server-side event, can it be fired from the client? So in this case, we're going to want to set that to true, so that from our server, when a player joins, we can automatically open this login menu by firing it from the onPlayerJoin function that we have in our players resource. So now that we have this add event, the event exists, and we are now listening for this event to open our menu, we need to find a way to trigger the event. Now, there's three functions here that are available so that we can trigger events. If we're on the server side, if we're running server-side code, like our players.lua resource, we can trigger a client event using the trigger client event function, where we specify who to trigger the event for. Now, who to trigger the event for could be root, meaning we trigger it for everyone, or it could be the specific player. So in our case, we're going to be doing something like add event handler on player join. And then what we're going to be doing is triggering a client event called login menu open. And in this first argument, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be passing it the source. So it only triggers, it only opens the login menu for the specific player that joined. The next argument, being the event name, is just the event that we are trying to trigger. And then the third argument is the source of the event. Now, the source of the event in this case is going to be source, being it's going to be the player that joined. And then we're not going to pass any further arguments, but if this function took arguments like the time they joined we could do something like fetch the time the player joined by doing get real time. And then we could pass that along to the client so that they can make use of it here in opening the menu. They want to specify, they want to say, you know, it's 5:35 p.m. Thanks for joining the server. So any arguments that you have, you can specify them in the trigger client event and they'll get passed into this closure that we have as our handler. So that's trigger client event. Now, when we've opened our login menu, we're going to make use of trigger server event when the player clicks the login button after they provided us with their username and password. We'll trigger a server event that's going to run that account login code that we built several episodes back. The third way to trigger event is just trigger event. Now, this function is available both on the client and server side, and it just means trigger an event on the same side of the code that I'm already on. So trigger event, if you're calling it from client side code, will run on the client, and if you're calling it from server side code, it will run on the server. So let's go ahead and actually try and implement what we've got going on here, and we'll get started with our login menu. So if we open up our sidebar here, I've already created this login_c file. And in the meta.xml, I'm just going to come over into players and I'm going to add a new script, src login c.lua, and name that type client. And so now I have that here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to look at our onPlayer join resource. And we're going to take what we've done here and we're going to get rid of that. And we're going to bring it over to the server side, and we're going to call it right here. Now, one thing that we want to do is not spawn our player in yet. The person has just received the login menu, so let's just have them looking at one point. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the spawn player. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the wiki and we're going to look at how we can make the script look at a specific position rather than look at the actual player. So let's jump into our, client functions, and we're going to look at something called set camera matrix. So set camera matrix, we specify the player and then where they are going to be and what they're going to be looking at. So we'll go ahead and run this as the client here. Let's dive over here and we're just going to pop that in right there. So we need the position X, Y, Z, and then what they're looking at, and we'll leave the rest of that out. So where are they going to be located? Let's put them at 0, 0, 100, and we'll have them looking at 0, 100, 50. So they're going to be looking somewhat down because they're looking from a height of 100 down to a height of 50, and they're going to be looking 100 feet further forward, looking north. So they'll be looking north at the river that runs along in front of north side of Blueberry. And so let's dive back over to our server code, and we're just going to go ahead and remove the set camera target here, and we're going to take fade camera, and let's just dive over to the wiki and enter fade camera, and we'll notice that fade camera can also be run on the client side. So we will take this code and we'll put that into our login menu as well. I'm going to get rid of our time join because we don't actually need that. And now, when we're running it on the client side, we don't need to specify who we're running it for because we're running it for the client that's running it. So we just specify fade camera true, and it should fade in our camera. We'll have that happen after we've set where they're looking at so that we're fading into actually seeing something. And then we'll go ahead and open our menu. So let's get rid of this, and we'll get rid of this. And let's jump over to our server, and we'll restart players. Jump over here, and let's join our Learn to Code MTA server, and let's see if we end up looking at something. Not looking at anything. So we have our login menu open. Bring it for the root. Let's jump over to players. On player join. Trigger the login menu open. Let's go ahead and just output chat box here. Ah, okay. So it looks like it just hadn't loaded properly or something, but there we go. Okay, so we're looking north. We have a view to work with here. Let's jump back over to our server, or our script, sorry, and we'll get rid of our welcome to our server message. And what we're going to go ahead and do is open their menu. So what we want to do here is we want to create a window. Now, we want that window to be centered on the user screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to create a new function called get window position. It's going to accept the width and the height that we want to make this window. And what we're going to do is, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab the screen width and the screen height of the user that's joined using a function called GUI get screen size. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a local X and a local Y variable. So X is going to be equal to the position that will put this window with this given width and height centered on our screen. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find exactly center of the screen. So we can do that by just going screen width divided by 2. So we have the width of our screen, and then we're grabbing what is half of that, which will give us exactly the middle of our screen. And then we're going to subtract from the middle half of the width of our window so that the window gets exactly centered where we want it to be. So we're going to go width divided by 2. And we're going to do the same thing with the Y. So we're going to take screen height, and we're going to subtract height divided by 2. Now, so let me just briefly explain what width and height are. So if we come over to our MTA server, I'm running on a resolution of 1980 by 1080. So if I look at the width across, that is 1,920 pixels. And if I look at the height up and down, it's 1,080 pixels. So if I come over to our screen, if I come over to our code here, the width is going to be, let's say 400 pixels. So what we're going to do is we're going to go local X, Y, width, height is equal to get window position of, let's call it 400 by 400 by now, for now. Okay, so next what we need to do is return our X, Y, width, height out of this function so that we can use it here. And then we're just going to grab all of these and we're going to provide them as arguments to our GUI create window. So we are specifying that we want it to be in the center of our screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to call it login to our server. So this is the title that's going to appear at the top of the GUI. And then finally, what we need to do is we need to put false here, which is going to tell it that we do not want it to be relative. So we won't dive too much into relative versus absolute positioning, but in a multi-theft auto server, if you have a width of 1920 by 1080, instead of going with absolute values of, okay, I want it to be at a width of 400 pixels and I want it to be 800 pixels from the left. instead, what we will do is, if it was relative, we would say, okay, I want it to be 0.3 out of 1. If 1 is the full width, 0.3 puts it about here. Then I want it to be 0.3 wide, which gives it that. It's an entirely different way of positioning stuff and making your views responsive. I find that it doesn't work terribly well in most circumstances, just because you can't really if you have a super small screen, it'll just kind of smush everything together and it looks bad. So what I prefer to do is just come up with a UI that fits in basically every resolution, and then just put that dead center on the screen using the method that I showed you here. Now, if we didn't want this to be centered in the screen exactly, what we could do is, we could just replace width and height with 400. Then we could say we want it to be 100 X and 50 Y. And what that means is it's going to go 100 pixels on the X axis, which means left to right. So from the left side, it's going to be 100 pixels over, and then it's going to be 50 pixels down from the top. So that will put it right about here, and then we would have 400 by 400. So that's kind of the way that things work with GUI create window is, or any of the GUI stuff that we're going to work with today. X and Y are positions relative to the top left. So X being how far away from the left side wall of your view, and Y being how far down from the top. And then width and height is going to be how big is that GUI in the window. But we're going to try and just directly center that guy using our mathematical equation that we've come up with up here. And let's just go ahead and restart a player's resource. But before we do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just trigger event, login menu, open. We're going to trigger it for the local player. We're just going to trigger this event right in the script so that when the resource restarts, it just triggers this event and automatically opens this. This is basically just going to be temporary while we're developing this view so that we don't have to keep reconnecting to our server every time we restart this resource. So we'll restart players. Oops, we'll restart players. And if we come back, we now have a 400 by 400 window with our title bar at the top that says log into our server. So we're making good progress here. What we want to do next is just break down what we want to put in this window. So we want to have a label for the username. We want an input for the user to put in their username. And then we're going to do the same thing for password. And then we're going to provide a few different buttons. So we're going to provide a register button. And we're going to provide a login button. So if they type in their username and password, then they can click login, move on. And if they don't have a username and password, they can click that register button, and then we'll take them to a separate register button thing as well. And then we're also going to put in a forgot password button. So let's figure out what we want to actually do to make these. So creating a label is just GUI create label, and then it's going to be looking for again an X, a Y, a width, a height, and it's going to look for the title, whether or not it is relative, and its parent. So in this case, the parent is going to be our window. We've already decided that it's not going to be relative. We're going to say username. Now, usually for labels, I like a height of 20. And for the width, we're just going to go with width minus 20. So we're going to go with the width of the window, and we're going to leave 20 pixels off of that. Now, the reason why we're going to do that is because the X, we're going to put 10. So this means that our label is going to cover the entire window that we have here, but it's going to leave 10 pixels on either side of that label for some padding, so that there's some room there. And for the Y, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to start at a height of 30. So we have a little bit of top padding there. The height, if you start at 0, it starts from above where this title bar is. So what we want to do is we want to account for that being about 20 pixels and then give ourselves about 10 pixels there so that we match our padding on the side. Let's go ahead and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to account log in so that I can restart players from in the game and I don't have to jump over to the server. And okay, so we have a username input now, or a username label rather. Now we're going to create the username input. And so to do that, we're going to GUI create edit. So edit is kind of your standard input box. So we're going to again give that 10 off of the right side. We're going to put this at a height of 50, which will put us directly below our username input. We're going to again go with a width minus 20, and then we'll go with a height of, let's go with a height of 30, make that input box nice and big so that people can kind of see it. Then you can put in a default text here if you wanted to. We're going to skip that and just make it blank so that people can just get right in there and type in their username. And then we are going to set that to be not relative and belong to the parent as well. So let's restart players, and that looks pretty decent. One thing that I'm kind of noticing is the way that these rounded edges come out and then this username label being here, I kind of want to like shove this in another 5 pixels. Let's try 15, and then that'll make 30. Yeah, 30 sounds about right. And we'll just come back, restart players. Yeah, that looks better. So we're gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing for password. And we will just let's just copy these guys, and we'll just put these down here, and then we'll just change that to, instead of saying username, we'll just say password. And we'll change this to say password. And then we just need to figure out our height. So we had 50, and then that was 30. So if we put, so then that gives us 80. Let's put this at 90. This at 110. So 90 gives us 10 pixels of padding below our username bar here. And then it also 110 gives us 20 below the password field. So if we restart players, we're now accepting username and password. Looks pretty decent. One thing you'll notice that I'm doing right now is I keep having to open the chat box to get my cursor up. We definitely don't want that to happen. So let's just jump over to the wiki real quick, and let's just search for a cursor. So show cursor is a function that we can trigger on the client side, and then we can just go show and toggle controls. This will stop you from being able to use your binds while you're while this cursor is open. So in this case, we're going to stop people from using binds because it's the login screen, and we don't want them to hit any binds anyways. So we're going to go ahead and show cursor. We want it to be showing, and we want it to disable binds. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the input mode. So input modes are essentially when you're typing, can you hit binds? If I was to be in here and I hit if I was to be in here and I was to hit T, is it going to be able to open the chat box, stuff like that? We kind of want to block all all binds while you're in the login screen. So we're just going to go over here and we're going to make use of no binds. So we'll just UI set input mode. Oops, no binds. And let's restart players again. So now our cursor is automatically opened. We can click on the username and password input. We can type, and there is no chance that a bind is going to be fired off and that we would have to deal with. Let's go ahead and jump back in. And the first button that I kind of want to create is the login button. I'm just going to put that above the register button for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to GUI create button. Now, we had the last height that we were dealing with was 110, and we were dealing with, so we were at a Y position of 110 with an input height of 30. So we're up to 140, but we want to give 10 pixel padding. So we're going to go with 150 as our new height. Again, we're going to make it 10 pixels off of the side. So the width is going to be width minus 20. And then our height is going to be 30 to match our input fields. And we're just going to go log in, relative, and its parent is window. Let's just jump over and restart that. Cool, we have a login button. Looks pretty nice. Let's just go ahead and create our register and forgot password buttons. Can't seem to type today. Start with that, and we're gonna go with 190, our Y position, and we're going to go with instead of a width of minus 20, we're gonna do something a little different. Let's make our register and forgot password buttons only take up half of the screen so that we kind of save some real estate, and also having 3 buttons in a row on the y-axis kind of doesn't feel right to me. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna go width divided by 2, and then we're gonna subtract out 15. So 15, so 10 is gonna account for our padding on the left side, and then we want to have a padding of 10 in between the 2 buttons. So if we have 5 padding accounting for this button, and then we put the second button an additional 5 past half width, that'll give us 10 pixels in the middle there to look nice. It's going to be a height of 30, and we'll put sign up. Seems nice. And then we're going to come down and create our forgot password button. Now for this X, we're going to go with width divided by 2, and then we're going to go plus 5 to give us that 5 pixels that I was just mentioning there. We don't actually need these brackets because bed mass will handle that for us. So let's go ahead and Y position of 190 because it's going to be on the same line as the previous. And then we will do a width that is the exact same as the one above, and then a height of 30, password, false window. Okay, that's looking pretty crispy. We need to button up the height of this box a little bit. So what we're gonna do is, so we had a final Y of 190 with 30, so we're at 220. And then we're going to give a 10 pixel padding on the bottom, so 230. So let's make our final height of this window 230 pixels. So if we came over here, we had width height. So instead of 400, if we make this 230, that looks pretty good. So there you have it. That's our first login GUI. It doesn't do anything yet. So in the next episode, we're going to take the event stuff of triggering server events, and we're going to figure out how to actually repurpose our account login command and instead have our GUI serve as our login. So that's it for this one, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button down below. Keep up to date with future videos. Hit that subscribe button. If you're not caught up, check out the last video over there to my right. And that's it. I'm gonna go play some Grand Theft Auto. I will see you in the next one.